My name is Madeleine Vences Rendon, and this is my week one reflection. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started. So in this week's module, we focused on practicing ethnographic interviewing. Our goal was to understand different methods for documenting conversations and information. We use three methods from memory, taking notes, and using an audio recording like our phones. And using the same set of questions, I conducted three interviews, each with one of the different methods outlined here. And I found that combining all three approaches is the most effective way to really listen carefully while also getting those important details. Each method had its own benefits and drawbacks. I would say that my least favorite was the note taking. It was a lot of multitasking, but essentially, or ideally, you kind of want to use the memory section so that you can really engage with the person across the table from you, keep that eye contact, ask those probing questions with decent time. You can also jump in and take notes if anything pops up that feels really important, but then you also have that audio recording in the background to come back to later. And I think the biggest difference when learning something new about ethnographic interviews compared to the kind of traditional interviews that we're used to, like what we already know, is what who is sitting at the other end of the table or where you're sitting at, right? So, for example, in traditional interviews, we don't really do much listening. So if I'm in a job interview, I'm responding, answering questions. I'm trying to strategically and concisely present myself as a good person, a good employee, a good citizen, for example. It's not exactly a conversation that is destined for free-flowing dialogue or really kind of in-depth questions about the human experience necessarily. Um, and based on my experience with three different type of traditional interviews, the side I'm sitting on and the person on the other end can really shape the experience. So, for example, if I'm talking with a friend and I'm asking her about her recent trip abroad, I'm asking, questions and I'm actively trying to learn more about her experience. So I'm watching her facial expressions, her hand gestures, as she gets excited, and maybe keeping an eye on her face for any like sore spots that she talks about, maybe like driving to the airport or getting scammed as a tourist. So it's a much more broader conversation that can go in a million different directions in 100 different tangents that can open even more kind of avenues for conversations versus a more structured questioning, such as I was thinking more kind of like a job interview. When I'm sitting on the other end of the table with my interviewer, my answers are very scripted. They're very meticulously crafted. I'm aiming at achieving a specific goal in mind. So again, it's not maybe as free flowing as the first example of speaking with a friend. But there's also situations where we're asked to share our experiences. For example, if you dine at a restaurant, they might send you a follow-up email with a survey that you can fill out. And you might not have the chance to really kind of go into depth or detail about your experience there because it might just be like click through options. It might not give you the prompt to type a few sentences about your experiences. And so, since there's no one on the other end of that metaphorical table, it feels kind of like a missed opportunity to really explore issues that could potentially help the restaurant improve. And reflecting on the reading that we did by H. Russell Bernard on ethnographic interviewing, he described four different methods. And we're going to talk about unstructured, semi-structured, and structured and the differences between all of them. So with unstructured interviews, you sit down with a person and conduct an interview. It's not indirect. It's very, they're aware of what's going on. And this is kind of an area that you can really get people to open up and express themselves at their own pace. It's great for building rapport before you structure. There's more formal interviews versus semi-structured interviews. They use a written list of questions in a particular order. So this is kind of what I was thinking with a professional survey that lands in your inbox. You know exactly what you want as the interviewer, so that's the questions that you're sending. And it's also ideal for people that are busy who don't have an hour to sit down with the interviewer and kind of talk through a bunch of topics. It's very to the point. Finally, they're structured interviews. These are an explicit set of questions with trigger points. So, for example, if I ask a question, or excuse me, if I ask XYZ question, then you prompt them with XYZ question as well. I'm not super sure how the structured survey would work in real life. So maybe this is a little bit of an area that I need to do more exploration on. But to kind of sum up the ethnographic interviewing styles, I really liked this quote from Russell. He said the rule is get people on a topic of interest and get out of the way. And so that kind of just summed up my experience learning about ethnographic interviewing. Um, and it's funny to think that kind of when we have normal conversations and, you know, people go off on tangents or, you know, they get swept up inside conversations, that's really the kind of important part of ethnographic interviews is kind of letting people guide you in the direction that they want to talk about. So as the interviewers, we can set the subject or set the focus, but the people across the table can really determine what the content we talk about. And I think that's a really cool experience. So that is my reflection. I think I've talked enough. Thanks so much.